Hello there. As you can see, things are a bit different today. To be honest, my brain has gone a little numb from researching so many Flash games and defunct virtual worlds. I just needed a little break to do something a bit less scripted and more goofy. Today I'm here to discuss a slightly different facet of nostalgia that I think all of us were affected by in one way or another. That is, the random, usually very mundane stuff that just terrified the absolute bejesus out of us when we were kids. I'm not talking about the things that I was legitimately afraid of, but rather the things that had basically zero capacity to hurt me in reality, but that kept me up at night with terror regardless. I'm going to be using a 4-tiered chart today. At the very bottom there's the WTF was I thinking tier, which describes things that I was afraid of but now completely fail to understand why I was afraid of them in the first place. Above that is I guess, which are things that I no longer am afraid of today and don't think they were ever objectively that scary, but are less nonsensical than the bottom tier. After that we have understandable, which are things I'm no longer afraid of and yet I can easily understand why I was afraid of them in the past. Finally, at the top there's I was right, which are for things that I was completely correct about being scary. Okay, let's get into the ranking. First, automatic toilets. This one began in the first grade when the toilet I was using at school overflowed. I had never experienced this before, so this was a jarring realization that these devices that I'd come to take for granted could unexpectedly betray me at any time. This gave me a vague apprehension of every toilet that weren't the ones from home, but the ones that were especially bad were automatic flush toilets because you had no control over when they went off. And especially the fact that they would sometimes go off while you were still using them, which to me meant that they might start overflowing while I was still sitting there. And the more I think about this, the more I feel like this might be a justified thing to worry about. I'm giving this one an understandable. Next, Jimmy Neutron. I didn't watch the show Jimmy Neutron or any of its spin-offs as a child because I was really unsettled by the early CG that it employed. I really thought those character models were the stuff of nightmares, especially Carl, and this fear carried over to most early 3D animated shows, with the exception of maybe VeggieTales. I think those guys got a pass because it's way easier to represent a cartoon tomato in 3D than a human. I still know very little about the show because I just kind of find it hard to look at, which to me is a very important aspect of the enjoyment of animated shows. However, I no longer find it scary, so this one's getting an I guess. Next, Austin Powers. I can't explain this one. However, I do remember how I felt about it. If I saw any of those movies playing, not only could I not be in the same room as the TV it was in, I couldn't be on the same floor. If it wasn't dark out, I would just leave the house entirely until the movie was over. There was honestly little else that I was more afraid of than Austin Powers. He made regular appearances in my nightmares. I think I was convinced that he was capable of coming out of the TV and chasing after me. The story in my family goes that my sister leaned over to me while the movie was playing and said, "The music's getting worried," which led me to run out of the room screaming, unable to tolerate the sight of Austin Powers ever again. This one's a WTF was I thinking. Next, virtual pet game over screens. The two main virtual pets in my life were Tamagotchi and Pixel Chicks, and both of them had equally traumatic game over screens if you weren't attentive enough with that device. The Tamagotchi will literally die if left unattended, and I get the impression that every generation had a different death animation, and all of them are pretty equally alarming. However, none of them matched the death animation that I remember, which was that a skull flashed on screen as a horrible static distorted noise played over and over again. I put the Tamagotchi away for a good while after that because I really wasn't willing to experience that twice. The Pixel Chick, on the other hand, just moves out when you don't play with her enough, which doesn't sound very scary, right? Ignoring the Pixel Chick's house will make the neglect counter start to count up, and if you get even one extra point of neglect, the house will become covered in cobwebs, and there's no way that you can clean them up in normal gameplay. That and the girl will start behaving coldly to you, sometimes just flat out saying no to your button presses. This is already unsettling. It's not a good feeling to feel like your virtual pet is starting to hate you and there's nothing you can do to make it better. Once the neglect counter reaches 5 points, which happens in a shockingly small amount of time, the girl will leave the house entirely, leaving a ghost behind in her absence. This is just such a hilariously cruel game design choice. Did they really not consider that it would be a little scary to imply that the house becomes haunted after she leaves? After this, I had to take the batteries out and keep it buried at the bottom of my toy chest for months, with the bottom panel off to be absolutely sure there's no batteries, and I still regularly had nightmares about it turning on and haunting me. I'm putting this one in understandable. Next, toys with heating elements. I was always so conflicted about these as a child because they looked like so much fun in their ads, but yet anytime I actually had the opportunity to play with one, I would be way too freaked out by the heating elements to actually get near it. I was extremely afraid of fire and getting burned as a kid, and this stuff was no exception. And you know what? This one is an I was right. Look at all the recalls the Easy Bake Ovens have. 77 reports of burns, 16 of which reported a second and third degree burns, one of which was a serious burn that required a 5-year-old girl to have her finger amputated. This fear was a solid judgment from young Lee. Next, roller coasters. This one's pretty basic, unlike some of the weirdos on this list. Really, anything involving heights was a no-go for me as a child, and so a device that seemed like you were hurtling through the air in a metal box of death just didn't seem like a quality pastime to me. Even to this day, I've still only rode a handful of roller coasters. However, I can at least acknowledge that roller coasters are much safer than a lot of things that I take for granted, like driving in cars. This one gets an I guess. Angela Anaconda. My name is Angela, hey, hello. Welcome to my very own show. Maybe one of the worst kid shows I have ever seen. I really don't think there's any mystery as to why this one automatically inspired fear. I was scared enough of this show that I didn't catch any of the plot as an actual child, but now that I've grown up and watched a few episodes out of curiosity, the writing is equally bad. I'm not kidding when I say that this is one of the most mean-spirited kid shows I've ever seen. It's full of cruel jokes about weight and appearance, and the entire plot is focused around how much of a petty, jealous bitch Angela is towards her rival Nanette. The show portrays neither of them in a positive light, and yet the framing clearly suggests that Angela is supposed to be the good guy, when in reality she's just the underdog bad guy. Angela rarely seems to get comeuppance for her frankly vile attitude, which is a strange message to give out on a show for pretty young kids. I was right. Next, 3 horns never play with long necks. So, as a kid, like many other kids, I gave my Land Before Time VHS tape a workout. I really loved that movie. The visuals, the soundtrack, the ugly, wrinkly dinosaurs, I loved it all. However, there was one scene that when I knew what was coming, I had to leave the room every time. In the movie, Sarah's father learns that she's been playing with dinosaurs outside of her own species, and chastises Littlefoot by saying, "3 horns never play with long necks." That's it. That's it. For some reason, this very short little clip just scared the hell out of me. I think it's because Daddy Tops looks so menacing. Look at his teeth there. The way he's framed, it almost looks like he's about to eat Littlefoot. I guess the line delivery is also sort of sinister. Regardless, this one's going in WTF was I thinking. Next, Smeagol. My family was big into Lord of the Rings. I grew up surrounded by life-size cardboard cutouts of Frodo, Sam, and Aragorn. I think I didn't have this reaction towards Smeagol in my initial viewing of these films. I thought he was weird-looking, but not scary. It was when I encountered the talking Smeagol plush doll in my older sister's closet did this fear really cement itself. I truly was convinced this doll was cursed, and I vaguely recall my sister teasing me with it in ways that didn't help with that, and it ended up basically becoming a gargoyle preventing me from entering my sister's closet. Ever since I became afraid of that doll, I kind of became alarmed by Smeagol in general. One year we had a Lord of the Rings calendar, and my birthday month, July, was Smeagol, and I was so miffed by that. And for that whole month, his lingering presence in the kitchen meant I wasn't willing to stay there for any longer than absolutely necessary. I feel mostly ambivalent towards Smeagol today. He gets an I guess. Kid Pix, oh no. I played a lot of Kid Pix as a kid because I think it was easily the best of the kids' drawing programs. But what I did not appreciate about it was the little undo guy who said, "Oh no!" The undo guy would say a lot of different things, including the iconic, "I made a boo-boo, yeah." But it was this soundbite in particular that really set me on edge and made me not want to keep playing. I played this game with the sound on mute more often than not. WTF was I thinking? Next, rumble strips. These are the striped grooves and roads that make a really loud sound when you drive over them. Sometimes they're at the shoulder to alert you that you're drifting out of the lines, other times they're in places that require major slowdown. And man, there was little else that could ruin little me's day like driving over one of those rumble strips. I'm still sensitive to loud sounds even today, but back then, driving over those would make me completely inconsolable for a good long time. I have a faint memory of my family celebrating in the car on the first time that I managed to go over one of those without crying. These ones get an I guess because while they are alarmingly loud, they're like that for a good reason. Next, the blue screen of death. There are really few things that alarmed me more as a kid than feeling like I'm not in control of the electronic device I'm using. And error and crash screens really triggered that fear like none other. The form of the blue screen of death that I grew up with was harshly blue, oppressive in its brightness and saturation, and used far too many large, complicated words for my young mind to comprehend. All I knew is that the computer is out of control, and this means I am going to die. There was really nothing that could get little me off the computer for a good long while like encountering a blue screen. And the problem with blue screens is that if you see one, you're much more likely to see more of them again in the near future. I could barely tolerate being in the same room that the computer was in too soon after seeing one of these. I honestly think the update to these screens was a welcome change. The softer blue and the goofiness of the frown emoticon do put me at ease. I may be more interested in crash screens nowadays than afraid of them, but that element of losing control of your computer puts this one in the understandable category. Next, the death of the sun. I liked to read a lot as a kid, and this eventually got me reading about astronomy. The life cycle of stars is pretty basic information there, so obviously most of these books covered that. At least one of them explained the hypothetical death of the sun in detail, during which it will swell and ultimately swallow up the Earth. I wasn't equipped to understand the timescales involved in this phenomenon, which spans billions of years. I didn't realize that humanity would be near inevitably extinct by the time that this rolls around. So I thought that the sun could start dying at any moment, like a person, and therefore it was in early elementary school that I had my first full-on existential crisis. I was under the impression that the sun could start swelling up to swallow the Earth at literally any moment, initiating a perpetual undercurrent of fear and anxiety that I still carry with me to this day. Maybe I was ill-informed about the scope of time involved in the life cycle of stars, but this one's still going and understandable due to being a very heavy concept for a kid to have to deal with. Next, the Invader Zim episode Dark Harvest. I loved Invader Zim as a kid, and I still do. I would watch the DVD of Season 1 that I had on loop. And there was one episode in particular that would be skipped every single time. This was Dark Harvest. In this episode, the alien Zim notices that the fact that he doesn't have human organs could be a problem for him. And therefore, he takes to going around his school stealing organs from his classmates. This episode has a lot of very memorable and unsettling visuals, like this Zim overstuffed with human organs, Dib trying to hide from him in a dark, creepy science classroom, and the most potent image of all, when Dib is running down the hallway to get away from Zim as the ceiling tiles are falling out from behind him, indicating that he's being chased from above. Nowadays, I think this episode is awesome, but I was right! To this day, I still have nightmares where I'm running down a hallway and the ceiling tiles are falling to the ground behind me. Next, Bingo Bear. Bingo Bear was an electronic talking bear and the bane of my existence from as early as I can remember. To understand why, simply listen to this advertisement.
I think I'm in love.
Oh, there's that voice I hate so well. This ad is so focused on throwing shade at Teddy Ruxpin that it almost feels like a political attack ad. I never had a Teddy Ruxpin, but I feel like I probably would have been equally afraid of it if I had. I was highly convinced that Bingo Bear was going to come to life and try to kill me in my sleep. However, this fear faded relatively early as Bingo Bear took up permanent residence and attic storage, and my fear of him wasn't continuously reinforced as I got older. Therefore, he's an I guess. On a related note, let's discuss text-to-speech voices in general. I think I must be very badly affected by whatever the audio equivalent of the Uncanny Valley is, because hearing voices that sounded very close to human but not quite human was one of the easiest way to freak me out as a kid. I wasn't really full-time afraid of this one though. If I was adequately prepared to hear a text-to-speech voice, I could deal with it. However, there were some that I could never cope with, like Bingo Bears. I think there must have been a keystroke that activated text-to-speech because I do recall running out of the room in fear when the computer unexpectedly started talking in a robot voice. This one's another I guess. Next, 90s and early 2000s CGI. There isn't really one movie that represents this fear in particular, but one that jumps to mind and that I'm using as a thumbnail is Jim Carrey's The Mask. Pretty much any time a live-action film features CG that heavily warps or deforms the face or body of the actors, I was out. And before you're like, but Lee, a lot of that stuff's CG mixed with practical effects, that doesn't change how freaky it looks. Honestly, I feel like the hybrid CG practical effects from this time period tend to be more alarming than anything else. The live-action Scooby-Doo movies, Spy Kids, The Nutty Professor, nope. Some of these effects are truly the stuff of nightmares and to this day still make my skin crawl. I'm not saying it's bad filmmaking, but it just makes for terrifying visuals, especially for a non-horror movie. To be honest, I was right. There are a lot of movies from this time period that I still find very unsettling and kind of hard to watch due to the uncanny and off-putting effects. Next, glitched video games. This one can cover a broad array of different effects, but really it was all the same to me. Anytime a video game was doing something that it clearly wasn't supposed to be, it's terror time, baby! The games that I remember this happening most often with were The Sims, because with such a large and unwieldy code base, it's likely that you're going to run into a few problems every now and again. However, some of these are just horrifying. One that comes to mind is the glitch that happens when a character model is assigned to the wrong type of life state, which results in some truly horrifying animations as the model attempts to conform to positions that it was never meant to exist in. Unless you're intentionally causing the glitches, it can be extremely unpredictable when they do happen, and similarly to the blue screen of death, it's really unsettling to feel like you've lost control of the thing you're supposed to be operating. However, I find these glitches much more hilarious than scary nowadays, and so this one's going in understandable. Next, robot toys. As you may be picking up, I was a bit of a robophobe as a child. I could be really easily convinced into thinking these things were dangerous, and I think one of the asshole boys next door convinced me that his robot toy was a functional turret that could actually shoot and kill people. I was much too young to realize that this was total BS, and so this gave me a suspicion of pretty much every robot toy because I thought they all might contain a concealed weapon. I think this was reinforced by the fact that these toys tend to have very rugged and militaristic designs. This fear of robot toys was so pervasive that I was even kind of scared of my sister's Poochie dog, although I did eventually get over this. Today I mostly just feel like I was tricked out of enjoying a cool type of toy. This one goes in I guess. Next, spontaneous human combustion. I am not sure how I picked this one up. It could have been in a dream, for all I know, but all I remember is that one day I became extremely convinced that human beings exploding into chunks of gore was a pressing concern that may affect me or my loved ones at any time. While randomly exploding is, in fact, a scary situation, it's just not a problem that people have to deal with. This combined with the fact that I can't remember why I started being afraid of this in the first place makes it go in WTF was I thinking. Next, dying musical greeting cards. I have always been a person who's had a very hard time getting rid of cards. I understand on a rational level that cards are a one and done type of gift, but I just have a really hard time throwing away something that somebody bought for me and then wrote a whole paragraph on. And in the course of my life, I've received a few musical greeting cards, which I have been equally hesitant to get rid of. The one that I remember most vividly was a Hoops and Yo-Yo card that sung a goofy version of Happy Birthday. However, over time the power started to fail on the device, but not quite enough to go quiet entirely. Instead, the sound when you open it up was an unholy static shrieking. I believe I sealed this card with glue to prevent it from ever going off again. To give an example of what happens over time with this type of card, similarly to video game glitches, I find these more hilarious than scary nowadays because it took me like 5 minutes to regain my composure after finding that video. However, yeah, understandable. And now we've got our final tier list. In the WTF was I thinking category, there's Austin Powers, Three Horns Never Play with Long Necks, The Kid Picks Undo Guy, and Spontaneous Human Combustion. And I guess there's Jimmy Neutron, Roller Coasters, Smeagol, Bingle Bear, Text-to-Speech Voices, and Robot Toys. In Understandable, there's Automatic Toilets, Virtual Pet Game Over Screens, Blue Screens of Death, The Death of the Sun, Video Game Glitches, and Dying Musical Cards. And finally, in things that I was absolutely right about being scary, there's Toys with Heating Elements, Angela Anaconda, the Dark Harvest episode of Invader Zim, and CGI in the 90s and early 2000s. And that's all I have for today. What random dumb stuff were you terrified by as a kid? Do you relate to any of these? Would you change any of these rankings in your own list? Leave a comment and let me know. Go support my Patreon if you like these videos. You can get perks like full access to my community Discord for $2.50 per month, or exclusive videos for $5 per month. Thank you so much to Con, Fishcatch, Julia, Ms. Goat, Riley Meyer, and Tara Tara. You all make it possible for me to keep making these videos, and I appreciate you all so much. Okay, bye.